Sector 7 of Neo-Veridia was not where one went looking for light. It was the rough edge of the world, where the blazing quantum networks of the central city faded into jumbles of spliced wire and the perpetual scent of stale machine oil. In this technological black hole, Kaelen Thorne, 62, stood as the last guardian of pure physical principles. Thorne's shop, known simply as the Gear Works, was more than a repair facility. It was a historical sanctuary. Inside, the air hung heavy with brass, sulfur, and cold machine lubricant. Light did not emanate from plasma panels, but from bare, incandescent bulbs that highlighted thousands of intricate mechanical details. Clockwork chronometers, first-generation mechanical computers, forgotten Tesla coils, and blocks of rune-scribed metal used for raw energy stabilization. Thorne, once a legendary combat technician during the early cybernetic wars that birthed Neo-Veridia, did not look like a hero. His coveralls were permanently stained with grease, his silver hair tied loosely back. His eyes were sharp and tired, forever viewing the world through the lens of crude material and energy balance. He despised the current generation's blind reliance on the digital. Thorne's philosophical conflict focused entirely on the Aegis Force, Neo-Veridia's elite monster hunting squad. Aegis was the perfect archetype of the digital age. They relied on flawless predictive algorithms, AI-integrated reactive armor, and plasma weaponry capable of instant obliteration. They prided themselves on their unparalleled precision. Thorne called them the fools in shiny shells. In his mind, the digital was a convenient illusion, easily corrupted, and utterly incapable of resisting true cosmic threats. When facing entities that operated on raw energy, matter manipulation, or psychic resonance, things that violated conventional space-time, digital weaponry was simply a massive computer full of logic errors. He often grumbled to his steady clientele, "You can encrypt your data, but you cannot encrypt reality. Reality is analog, boys. It has mass, it's hard, and it won't be fixed with a software patch." Thorne didn't need to argue the analog philosophy with theory. He had living proof walking through the door of the Gearworks every day. The first was Splicer, a young hacker whose notoriety preceded him. Splicer had been a casualty of a psi-viral attack 2 years prior, a form of malware tuned to spread through neural frequencies and physically materialize. Aegis had attempted a clean sweep, using digital decontamination methods and nanofoam injections. The result, while Splicer's digital systems were cleansed, his physical body was not. A section of Splicer's right skull was now encased in a gray-blue biological plating, hard as bone, constantly generating a weak, raw psi-viral interference field. Splicer limped in, setting a cracked quantum circuit board on the workbench. "Wrench," Splicer rasped, his voice distorted by the raw energy resonance within his own body. "My nanoreactor inverted polarity again." Aegis said it was a psychosomatic error. Thorne scowled. "Psychosomatic error? That's the result of trusting fiber optics to connect your brain to the void, Splicer. When that thing hit you, it didn't just change numbers, it altered your fundamental material density." Thorne eschewed digital scanners. He ran his bare hand over the bone casing on Splicer's head, feeling the physical vibration. "Nanofoam can't handle raw interference. I'll have to use a composite of lead and finely ground quartz crystals to create a physical insulator, locking the field down. Aegis armor can stop a bullet, but it can't stop something that manipulates physics." Next came Gideon, a heavy, muscular old-model 404 Sentinel. He was an early-generation cyborg, not a pure AI machine, but Aegis had nonetheless retrofitted him with advanced digitalization. Gideon suffered from a severe malfunction. During high-stress missions, his mechanical intelligence would sometimes suffer a mental fault. He would freeze, attempting to resolve a philosophical contradiction introduced by his digital algorithm. "What is the malfunction, 404?" Thorne asked. Gideon spoke in a melancholy metallic voice. "During the Gamma Sector sweep, the digital identification system categorized an entity as theoretically non-existent. But I observed it. The contradiction crippled my logic processor. Aegis wants to format my entire personality. Thorne let out a short, contemptuous laugh. They want to erase your experience because it doesn't fit their spreadsheet. Your problem isn't digital. It's an input mechanics overload. The algorithm tries to balance infinity and finitude, and it short-circuits your metal skull. Thorne pulled out a complex analog testing apparatus, a classic mechanical oscillator. He carefully disassembled the hydraulic regulator system in Gideon's arm, where the digital systems had caused intermittent physical pulses. Instead of rewriting code, he replaced a silicon chip with a rune-etched quartz chip, physically arranged to create a pure, physical transmission path immune to digital logic errors. Analog allows for contradiction to exist, Gideon. Digital demands perfection, and the universe is not perfect. And finally, Alara, a woman who had fallen victim to a temporal entity during a failed Aegis raid. The entity hadn't stolen assets or energy. It stole segments of personal memory and lived time. Aegis scanners couldn't detect physical damage. Her digital medical records reported her as perfectly normal, save for insomnia and anxiety. Alara shivered, her empty eyes staring into the middle distance. Wrench, I feel like I'm aging too fast. And I forgot the smell of my son. Thorne knew the issue. The temporal entity didn't attack the body in a traditional sense. It manipulated the matter threads anchoring her reality. Digital, with its linear positioning systems, was entirely blind to spatiotemporal shifts. He prepared a series of conductors made of pure silver and a sapphire gem ground to a precise ratio. This was raw analog stabilization technology. Temporal entities cannot warp matter that is perfectly organized according to physical law. I won't patch your wound. I will create a matter resonator to anchor your existence to the current moment. When that thing tries to pull on your thread of time, it will hit pure physics. These clients were Thorne's most damning indictment of the Aegis Force. They were proof of digital technology's failure against cosmic threats, simply because Aegis had lost respect for raw matter and energy. Thorne closed the gearworks that night, his contempt solidified. They will continue to fail, he muttered to himself, until they realize that to fight the monsters, they need something that cannot be bent by any algorithm, the analog principle. As predicted, the brilliant quantum light of the digital force arrived at his storefront the following morning. Thorne shoved the heavy metal key into a lock mechanism that groaned louder than the door had, twisting it with practiced, rough force. The door didn't slide open electronically. It dropped with a heavy, hydraulic sigh, revealing a space colder and older than the main shop. The air here was a complex perfume of machine oil, tanned leather, polished brass, and the dry, metallic tang of stabilized ozone, a chemical scent of preservation. This was where Kaelen Thorne kept the relics too dangerous or too sacred for display. "Welcome to the analog core," Thorne muttered, stepping inside. No active heat signature, no magnetic shielding. Just physics. Jet stood in the doorway, the brilliant neon blue of his Aegis armor seeming vulgar and overbright in the dim, subterranean light. He felt the weight of Thorne's judgment. "Start stripping, Agent," Thorne commanded, gesturing to a low, solid workbench made of ancient, unvarnished oak. Every circuit, every coil, every sliver of binary code. "It stays here." Jet hesitated for only a second, the oath he'd just taken overriding decades of training. His armor was an extension of his nervous system, monitoring his vitals, predicting enemy vectors, and regulating his adrenaline. Removing it was like stepping naked into a blizzard. He reached up and disengaged the magnetic seal at the neck. The humming stopped. The integrated HUD went black. The titanium fiberweave chest plate was the first to come off, followed by the servo motors in the joints. Jet felt the immediate, shocking drain of real weight as the powered assistance vanished. He was a tall man, physically fit, but carrying the full load of unassisted armor was an entirely different kind of strain. He stacked the gleaming pieces neatly on the workbench, a funeral pyre of the digital age. The sight of the powerless, inert suit was strangely vulnerable. "You look lost," Thorne observed, leaning against a rack holding antique firearms, their barrels gleaming with preservative grease. The armor wasn't just protection, sir, Jet replied, already feeling the ambient chill on his skin. It was perception. It filtered noise, identified energy signatures, calculated ballistic trajectories. Now, I have none of that. Exactly, Thorne said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Now you have yourself. The chronoleech feeds on complexity. It exploits the lag between data input and algorithmic output. You must become simple, faster than any processor. Thorne moved to a separate vault within the armory, a steel cabinet secured by a massive bronze padlock. He unlocked it, revealing not plasma rifles, but heavy, handcrafted tools and garments. Your new uniform, Thorne announced, tossing a bundle of clothing onto the bench. It was heavy gear, thick, treated leather pants and jacket, reinforced with dark, unpolished steel plates sewn directly into the material. No fiber optics, no power cells, just kinetic dampening and brute physical protection. Jet quickly dressed. The leather smelled of smoke and oil. It was restrictive, hot, and required genuine physical exertion to move. He felt like he had been wrapped in a damp, weighted blanket. Now, the weapons, Thorne continued. He presented Jet with a massive, matte black slug-thrower rifle. It was purely mechanical, chambered for high density, depleted uranium rounds. It lacked scopes, stabilizers, or even a basic energy readout. This is a sledgehammer Mark IV. Pure kinetic impact. No energy signature to harvest, just mass and velocity. It hits the target exactly where you aim it. No algorithms. You pull the trigger, the pin hits the charge, the projectile moves. Absolute causality. Thorne picked up his own weapon, the enormous, ancient greatsword Jet had seen hanging in the shop. It was shockingly heavy, its edge honed to a terrifying, reflective sharpness. And for the entity itself? Jet asked, hefting the sledgehammer. It felt like lifting half his body weight. Thorne paused, his gray eyes focused intently. He walked over to a shielded pedestal and revealed the most peculiar object Jet had ever seen. A small, intricately carved sphere of obsidian, suspended within a lattice of vibrating copper wire and fine platinum filament. It pulsed slightly, but with no visible energy source, only a faint, low hum. This is the anchor, Thorne explained. Developed during the first temporal skirmishes 3 decades ago. It's a localized, self-adjusting temporal anchor. It doesn't rely on digital chronometers. It uses the harmonic frequency of the copper to establish a microstable temporal bubble around the bearer. When the chronoleech attempts to accelerate time, to age the area, this creates a purely physical counter-vibration, grounding us in the present moment. He secured the obsidian sphere to Jet's new leather belt, directly over the solar plexus. Keep it steady. Keep it warm. If the copper lattice snaps, we're dinner. The weight of the mission and the primitive gear pressed down on Jet. He felt stripped bare, reliant only on his bones and muscles. We have to move like the analog itself, Thorne stated, reading Jet's anxiety. Slow to react, difficult to shift, but absolutely impossible to destroy. Now, let's see if you can still hit what you aim at without a targeting computer holding your hand. Thorne led Jet through a back passage that opened into a desolate, subterranean firing range, smelling strongly of burnt powder and metallic dust. We start with the basics, Agent Veridian, Thorne said, tossing Jet a handful of heavy, smooth metal slugs. Digital training focuses on speed. Analog training focuses on feedback. He activated a series of mechanical targets, thick steel plates that zipped across a rail system, powered by enormous clockwork gears and pulleys. There was no laser tracking, no scoring display, just the sound of grating metal. You have 1 minute. Hit the moving targets. Tell me how the metal recoils, how the trajectory shifts, how the bullet reacts to the air density. Not what the computer tells you, but what your hands feel. Jet raised the sledgehammer. It bucked fiercely against his shoulder, the noise deafening. He missed the first 3 shots completely. The sheer kinetic shock of the rifle without dampening technology was brutal. His shoulder screamed in protest. "You're fighting the weapon." Thorne roared over the noise. "Let the shock travel through you, then stabilize." The digital world taught you to resist force. The analog world teaches you to absorb it and redirect. Jet closed his eyes, ignoring the flickering image of the target. He focused entirely on the metallic weight in his hands, the cold pressure against his shoulder, the smell of gunpowder, and the sound of the gear train moving the targets. He fired again. Clang. A direct hit. The difference was astonishing. The kick was still immense, but this time, he was ready for it. The immediate, raw kinetic feedback told him precisely how far off his aim had been, information his brain processed instantaneously, bypassing the need for a microchip calculation. Thorne nodded, a slight, approving movement. "Good. You're beginning to remember the language of iron. We have maybe 4 hours before the temporal shifts accelerate too far in Quan 9. By the time we enter that area, you must not only trust the analog, you must become it." He pointed to the obsidian anchor secured to Jet's chest. "When we face the chronoleech, you will move purely on instinct and physical observation. You will ignore any visual distortion, any temporal confusion. You will feel the stability of this anchor, and you will hold the line. Your only defense is pure, unadulterated reality." Jet tightened his grip on the sledgehammer, his muscles already aching. The blue Aegis uniform, the symbol of his former power, lay discarded on the bench. He was no longer DACVU Jet Veridian. He was just a man, armored in leather and iron, armed with physical causality, ready to step back in time to fight a thing that ate the future. The painful transformation began immediately in the dark mechanical workshop. For Jet Veridian, who had spent a lifetime cocooned by assistive technology, the removal of the Aegis power armor was not merely the shedding of metal, it was a ritualistic divestment, a rejection of identity. "Strip it all," Thorne commanded, his voice sharp as a newly honed edge. "Everything run by algorithm, everything that needs a battery or a radio wave. Take it off." Jet reluctantly began dismantling the Aegis Mark V, piece by expensive, chip-laden carbon plating dropping onto the concrete floor with dull clangs. The armor, hundreds of kilograms of metal that symbolized Aegis's power and invulnerability, was now a glittering pile of scrap beneath the old fluorescent lights. He removed the plasma rifle, a weapon capable of vaporizing a wall, and then the delicate neural link component embedded at his temple. Jet felt utterly exposed, not because he was reduced to thin thermal undersuit, but because he had lost his mental shielding. Digital technology was his language, his will. Without it, he was merely a young man facing a flesh-and-blood entity that manipulated time. Thorne watched with satisfied contempt. "You see it now, boy? We rely on what we cannot control. The chronoleech is a tear in the fabric of physical reality. Your digital is data, and data can be bent, reversed, or simply deleted. If you want to touch it, you must use the physical substance it cannot deny." Once every last vestige of digital equipment was removed, Thorne led Jet through a heavy, steel-plated, disguised doorway into his private armory. This was a sanctum of the analog. The air was thick with the scent of old machine oil, non-corrosive metal, and a subtle, mysterious essential oil. Towering shelves were crammed with tools, pure copper and silver wiring, rough-cut gemstones, intricate clockwork mechanisms, and ancient swords etched with detailed runes. Thorne walked to a hidden rack and picked up a sword. Not a razor-sharp weapon, but a rough-looking blade forged from a specialized titanium steel alloy, featuring a magnetic mechanical assembly and a resonance chamber built into the hilt. "This is the sonic blade," Thorne said, handing it to Jet. "It requires no electromagnets or miniature nuclear reactions. It runs on pure physics. It generates a high-frequency acoustic oscillation, a purely physical frequency that can shear through the densest organic matter. But it demands absolute stability from the wielder." Jet took the sword. It was no heavier than his Aegis digital weapons, but it felt more alive. "Activate it." Jet complied. A low-frequency hum resonated from the hilt, and the blade began to vibrate. The oscillation was unstable. It threatened to twist right out of Jet's grip. Control it. You have no computer to auto-correct the frequency. Thorne roared. Your focus, your physical stability. That is the only algorithm. An Aegis Digital only knows how to pull a trigger. An analog hunter must become the weapon. Thorne pressed Jet into grueling drills. He was forced to maintain a combat stance while keeping the sonic wave at a level of perfect consistency. If Jet lost focus for a second, the frequency spiked or died. An unstable sonic wave could damage his arm more than the enemy. Jet, accustomed to the Aegis armor compensating for balance and recoil, struggled mightily with the raw, personal precision required by the sonic blade. The frequency, Jet. Feel it. It is part of reality, not a virtual calculation. When you achieve that perfect equilibrium, the chronoleech will feel your physical presence as a denial of time itself. After hours of exhausting practice, Jet began to understand. Analog weapons were not tools of destruction, but extensions of will supported by unbreakable physical principles. The most critical part of the Cinders protocol was not the offensive weapon, but the defense. Thorne revealed his plan, creating an analog resonance grid to stabilize the space-time continuum around the rescue zone. The chronoleech thrives by corrupting time. It accelerates entropy, creates physical chaos, and sucks life energy. It cannot exist in an environment where physical laws are maintained perfectly. Thorne explained, unrolling an antique architectural map across the workbench. Thorne pointed to strategic points on the old factory layout. We will use raw quartz crystal, etched with post-entropy runes, connected by unadulterated copper wiring. Quartz is the perfect analog substance. It oscillates at a stable frequency, impervious to quantum interference. Jet was tasked with preparing the materials, a job requiring maddening meticulousness. He had to manually grind and engrave the quartz crystals according to Thorne's exact specifications. Every etch must be precise to the micron, Thorne warned. This is not 3D printing. This is direct physical intervention. These runes act as a filter, forcing the raw energy in the space to obey physical structure. It creates a temporal anchor, a barrier that cannot be manipulated. Over the next few hours, Jet learned to use mechanical etchers and analog microscopes to complete the task. He realized this labor required patience and precision far exceeding any requirement at the Aegis Digital Academy. If we want to fight an entity outside of space-time, we must become an unchangeable part of this space-time, Thorne explained while soldering a fine copper wire. Digital is compromise. Analog is truth. As the preparations finalized, Thorne looked at Jet, the former digital operative now an analog apprentice. Thorne placed a hand on Jet's shoulder, heavy with a century of experience. Jet, understand this. Extra-dimensional entities like the chronoleech are not monsters by your definition. They are phenomena, flaws in the cosmic matrix. Your Aegis always tried to use digital brute force to crush them. That is like trying to fix a leak in the ocean with a spoon. He paused. Your digital technology has made the world fragile. We built everything on principles that are easily bent, from quantum computers to plasma weaponry. All of it is illusion based on controlled energy. The chronoleech looks at you, and it sees moving targets protected only by corruptible data. Thorne pointed to the glowing, etched quartz crystals on the table. This is analog. Gemstone, metal, physical frequency. These are the fundamental building blocks of the universe. They cannot be fooled. When the chronoleech tries to reverse time around you, this resonance grid will generate a physical answer. No, time within this radius is stable. Thorne looked Jet directly in the eyes, confirming, the Cinders protocol is not a strategy. It is a return to basics. It is the rejection of human hubris that we can control the universe with microchips. We must become a humble part of it to survive. Now, you have the tools and the philosophy. Remember, bravery is not auto-targeting. Bravery is physical and mental stability when nothing protects you but knowledge. Jet's digital arrogance had utterly dissolved. He nodded, understanding that the impending raid would not be a technological battle, but a test of purity of matter and human will. Kaelen Wrench, Thorne, 62, was a ghost of the old System Wars era, a legend hidden beneath the grime of a dilapidated repairman. His shop, nestled deep in the wreckage of Neo-Veridia's District 7, was a sacred preserve for pure mechanics. Here, the blinding glare of the central city, where everything ran on quantum energy and digital processing, was strictly forbidden. Thorne, wearing thick, antique goggles and perpetually smelling of machine oil, publicly scorned the Aegis Force, the city's elite monster hunting unit. He believed Aegis's blind reliance on digital technology, automated plasma weapons, AI-integrated reinforced armor, made them fatally vulnerable. Cosmic entities, threats that obeyed no algorithmic logic, could effortlessly manipulate or invert the function of those digital tools. Thorne's loyal clientele were living proof of the digital era's failures. Lisa, a brilliant hacker whose mind and genetics were scarred after a cyviral attack, shattered her protective algorithms. D5, a mechanical sentry with a corrupted core that current technology could not repair. And Mrs. Eris, a woman haunted by memories stolen by temporal entities, fragments of time invisible to digital scanners. They came seeking physical stability and crude analog mechanisms, the only things immune to bending by supernatural threats. The quiet sanctity of Thorne's shop was shattered by crisp footsteps and shimmering blue light. Jet Veridian, a young Aegis operative and the epitome of the digitized generation, stood awkwardly amidst the lathes and antique tools. His reinforced armor, sleek and sophisticated, contrasted violently with the shop's gritty simplicity. Jet presented the latest threat, the Chrono Leech, a temporal entity breaching space-time. It was preying on a group of orphans imprisoned in a derelict factory in Belt 9. The victims were suffering rapid aging and energy depletion. Aegis had deployed 3 strike teams, each equipped with the strongest quantum weapons and advanced digital machinery, but all had failed miserably. Plasma weapons disintegrated, digital sensors were twisted by temporal disturbances, and drones simply vanished from the current timeline. Thorne, his eyes narrowed, offered a glacial refusal. You built a wall of illusion. Now that illusion is cracking, he stated. You rely on algorithms, but the Chrono Leech plays with pure material structure. It doesn't care about your code. However, when Jet mentioned the children, Thorne relented. He could not let personal pride overcome his conscience. If I help, you follow my laws, Thorne declared, his voice sharp as honed metal. I call it the Cinders Code. Strip every digital device. No reinforced armor, no lock-on targeting, no AI assistance. You will use only physical and analog tools. This is a hunt based on raw material and energetic balance. If Aegis has any hope of surviving in this world, they must learn to fight with their own analog hands and minds. Jet, though reluctant, accepted. He had to undergo the most painful dismantling of his career. The million-credit reinforced armor was removed. The plasma weaponry was archived. He felt naked, weak, yet there was a strange liberation from the continuous whispers of the AI. Thorne ushered Jet into his secret armory, a dark cavern filled with raw metal, crude quartz, runes carved on petrified wood, and complex mechanical apparatus. This is yours. Thorne tossed Jet a broad, dark blade devoid of digital luminescence. It was a sonic blade, powered by a mechanical battery and calibrated by hand. It possessed no auto-aim system or digital stabilizer. Its power lay in the user's personal focus and control. The most crucial part was setting up the analog resonance grid. Thorne instructed Jet on how to carve runes onto rough quartz crystals, how to weld pure metal conductors according to ancient geometric patterns. This grid was not an offensive weapon, but a physical stabilizer. When activated, it generated a crude analog energy field, acting as a physical jamming agent against all attempts at temporal or field manipulation. Thorne imparted the core philosophy. Digital is algorithm and encryption. It can be bent, it can be changed. Analog is physics, it is the structure of the universe. You cannot lie to matter. The chrono leech exists by exploiting the void between digital and reality. We will fill that void with undeniable reality. Jet learned to fight without digital parameters, learning to trust the vibration of the air and the weight of the weapon. He learned the Cinders code, absolute preparation, leaving no room for technological error. The derelict factory in Belt 9 stood out like an infected wound in Neo-Veridia's glittering digital landscape. As Thorne and Jet moved deeper inside, even the air seemed warped. The area defied normal physical laws, a constant sensation of drifting, as if walking on a flowing, reversed current. "Don't trust your eyes," Thorne growled softly, his analog gaze sweeping the dark corners. The chrono leech doesn't just distort light, it distorts temporal nodes. That makes you dizzy, disoriented, and think you're surrounded. Hold your center. Feel the ground. Jet, no longer relying on the old armor's digital terrain sensors, was forced to rely on basic analog senses. He felt the sudden drop in temperature and a supersonic vibration, signs of matter being drained of life energy. The dripping water from a broken pipe sounded as if it were repeating in a slow loop. They found the room holding the children, sequestered by the chrono leech in an old workspace. They lay huddled, skin wrinkled and pale as if decades older. Thorne immediately set to establishing the analog resonance grid. He carefully placed the rune-carved quartz crystals at the room's geometric intersections. Jet laid the hand-welded metal conductors along the rusting walls. The work demanded absolute precision. A minor misalignment would render the grid useless. When the last crystal was connected, Thorne activated his mechanical analog power source, a device resembling a complex steam clock. Whoom! Instead of brilliant plasma light, a low hum resonated, creating a faint, almost invisible gray force field. The air in the room instantly stabilized. The sensation of spatio-temporal distortion vanished, replaced by a sudden, almost deafening silence. "The grid has locked this zone into pure present," Thorne quickly explained. "Now we are undeniable, but we have also drawn its attention." Immediately, from the ceiling and cracks in the concrete floor, the chrono leech's physical manifestations appeared, temporal gnats. They were small materializations, shimmering like fog, moving in jerky spurts, alternately existing and non-existing in milliseconds. They were deadly, capable of severing a human's life energy flow with a mere touch. Jet reflexively reverted to his old Aegis instinct, attempting to lock on, but there was no digital signal. His frustration vanished as he recalled Thorne's lesson. "Feel the vibration, Jet. Steel doesn't lie." A gnat lunged. Jet held his breath, focusing on the supersonic whine of the sonic blade. He didn't try to see the gnat, but to feel its physical node as it materialized within the grid. As the entity attempted passage, it hit the analog field and was compelled to exist for a fraction of a second long enough to strike. Flash! Jet swung the sonic blade in a purely physical arc. The vibrating blade created a powerful sonic shockwave. It didn't just cut, it disrupted the entity's atomic structure. The gnat dissipated into a plume of gray-blue dust, accompanied by a shriek like tearing time. Jet began to move, swifter and more focused than ever. He realized the old digital armor had created a buffer between him and the battlefield. Now, he was the weapon. He had to trust his muscles, his balance, and the unbending laws of physics. Thorne, simultaneously protecting the grid, watched Jet fight. "Good, digital. You are learning to breathe analog." After eliminating the gnats, Thorne and Jet quickly reached the children. They wrapped them in blankets woven from gemstone-treated synthetic fibers, which acted as analog energy filters, then began moving them towards the safety of the grid's perimeter. It was at this moment the chrono leech realized the analog resonance grid was not merely a disturbance, but a genuine physical threat. From a pool of darkness at the end of the room, the main entity began to materialize. It had no fixed form, only a swirling mass of trapped timelines, inverted light and shadow, distorted human segments covered in an amber crystalline shell. It emitted a cosmic screech that forced Jet to clamp his hands over his ears. The shriek seemed intent on tearing apart nerve endings, elongating every painful moment. The entity lunged towards the analog resonance grid, attempting penetration. Its goal was to disrupt the grid's physical structure and absorb the life energy of the children. Boom. When the chronoleech hit the analog boundary, it could not pass through. Its power relied on bending time and space, but the grid, built on the principles of mechanical physics and pure geometry, was unbendable. Its temporal energy met absolute material resistance. The quartz crystals glowed, not with quantum light, but with a stable, warm analog luminescence. Thorne's analog field created a painful energy imbalance for the entity. The chronoleech could not consume this physical energy. It could only manipulate digital and temporal energy. "You cannot pass the truth, chronoleech," Thorne roared, his hand clutching the mechanical activator. The temporal entity, repelled and confused by the sudden physical stability, tried to create a massive temporal decomposition, generating a vortex of distortion to pull the grid into nothingness. But Jet was there. Relying on his new analog instinct, he charged, not towards the chronoleech itself, but towards the structural weak points near the exit portal. He used the sonic blade, not to kill, but to generate a powerful resonant sonic pulse into the area of the entity's contact with the grid. KRZZT. The shockwave from the sonic blade, a purely physical product, hit the chronoleech at its interface weakness. Pressured by both the grid and the sonic blade, the temporal entity recognized it was facing a completely new type of strategy, a weapon it could not manipulate. With a furious, frustrated shriek, the chronoleech disengaged from the grid, dissolving back into segments of distorted light, and retreated into the factory's inner dimension, leaving behind the analog stability Thorne had created. They had won, not through digital might, but through profound understanding of physics. Jet carried the children safely out of the grid's area of effect, where they slowly began to regain color and life energy. Jet removed his analog mask, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He looked at Thorne, no longer with the arrogance of a digital operative, but with the deep respect of a student. "My reinforced armor taught me how to strike. The Cinders code taught me how to survive," Jet admitted. "Digital technology is just a casing. You showed me undeniable reality." Jet realized that absolute analog preparation, the Cinders code, was the true foundation of survival in the war against cosmic entities. He didn't just respect Thorne, he needed him. Back at Aegis headquarters, Jet submitted his report, not with shame over digital failure, but with pride in the analog victory. The Aegis leadership had witnessed the total failure of their most advanced technology against the chronoleech, and now they saw the result of the analog method. Thorne, who expected to return to his reclusiveness, received an official invitation from the Aegis force. "We don't want an old digital warrior," Jet said. "We need a philosopher, a physical preservationist." Thorne, realizing he could not let the analog principles be buried again, accepted the invitation. He returned, not as a frontline fighter, but as the chief analog archivist. Thorne began his advisory work, establishing a new division within Aegis, the Department of Rough Physics Research and Application. He imparted the philosophy of balance and the art of physical monster hunting to the new generation of Aegis hunters, including Jet. Thorne ensured that, even in the dominant digital era, the Cinders code would remain a necessary and indispensable weapon. He brought analog balance to a world losing control to technology. Kaelen Wrench, Thorne, though past 60, moved with the steady precision of a clockmaker, his hands as strong and scarred as forged steel. He stood amidst the tarnished metal shelving of his repair shop in the ramshackle Sector 7. This space, known as crude memory, was a shrine to pure analog mechanics. Every ticking gear, every vacuum tube, and every brass regulator caught the dim light, offering a stark contrast to the blinding, sterile quantum glow of the central megalopolis, Neo-Veridia. For Thorne, analog was more than technology. It was undeniable physical truth, Weight, friction, Newton's laws, the very things the digital civilization sought to ignore. He held profound contempt for the Aegis forces, the official monster hunters, whom he dismissed as spoiled children coddled by their tech. He believed Aegis's blind reliance on the digital, plasma weapons, powered armor, predictive AI, was hubris. Digital devices offered overwhelming destructive power, but they were fatally vulnerable to threats that didn't obey ordinary physics, such as crude energy entities or matter-time manipulators. Crude memory housed the living proofs of digital failure. Varus, a young hacker whose digital systems had been hijacked by a cyberpunk attack, twisting his body into a distorted host. Ina, a mechanically augmented peacekeeper trapped in a ceaseless loop of pain by a corrupted algorithm. And most recently, Ilera, haunted by memories stolen by a temporal entity. Her recollections were not erased, but temporally displaced, beyond the retrieval capacity of any digital analyzer. Thorne had saved them, not with chips or algorithms, but with handcrafted analog circuits and absolute physical intervention. One afternoon, the quiet grime of Sector 7 was ripped apart by the whine of ultra-light jet engines. Jet Veridian arrived, the embodiment of the digital generation, young, sharp, and encased in Aegis power armor so polished it almost eclipsed the simulated sunlight of the city. Jet standing amid the dust and oil of crude memory created an undeniable tension. "Thorne," Jet said, his voice clipped and formal. "I come on special orders from the Aegis Commandant." Thorne didn't look up, tightening an ancient bolt. What catastrophe has Aegis manufactured this time? Another plasma coil stuck in self-destruct? Jet, fighting to maintain composure against the provocation, cut to the chase. He outlined the new threat, the chronoleech. It was not merely a beast, but a sentient spatio-temporal rift, burrowed into an abandoned factory, draining the life force and causing rapid aging in children trapped inside. "We've tried everything," Jet admitted, his arrogance dissolving into desperation. "Quantum weapons misfire. Digital hardware scrambles and shuts down. It doesn't attack our tech, it simply negates its reality within the affected zone." Thorne paused. For the first time, he met Jet's eyes. The lives of children were a boundary even philosophical contempt could not cross. "So," Thorne growled, "you finally realize that when the algorithms stop working, you're nothing but empty shells? Is that it?" Thorne initially refused, scorning Aegis for paying the price of its own arrogance. Yet, faced with the immediate survival of the innocent, the old warrior's conscience resurfaced. "I will help," Thorne said, "but on my terms. Absolutely no compromise." Thorne delivered his absolute condition, Code Cinders. "You will strip away every piece of Aegis digital equipment. No power armor, no network link, no plasma weaponry. You will fight with metal, stone, and sheer will. I require an analog instrument, not a talking machine." Jet swallowed hard. Shedding the Aegis armor was akin to shedding his identity, but desperation and the undeniable evidence of digital failure convinced him. "I accept." Code Cinders. Jet Veridian's transformation began immediately. In the deep basement arsenal of crude memory, where no network signal dared penetrate, Jet shed the costly, intricate layers of his power armor, the very symbol of digital dependence. He was left in basic fatigues. The shock of the diminished weight, of feeling the physical world directly, was overwhelming. "Digital convinced you that strength lies external," Thorne lectured, circling Jet like an old tiger. "Analog teaches you that strength lies in your bones and tendons." Thorne guided Jet into a secret vault, a labyrinth of ancient metals, wiring, raw quartz crystals, and mechanical devices etched with archaic runes. "This is your weapon." Thorne threw him a sword. It had no sensors, no energy matrix. It was a sonic blade, crafted from a specialized titanium steel alloy, manually tuned to generate an ultra-high acoustic frequency capable of tearing molecular bonds. It demands absolute focus. 1 millisecond of distraction, and the frequency wavers, turning it into useless scrap iron. The most vital part of the preparation was the creation of the analog resonance grid. This was a complex network Thorne had researched for decades, utilizing quartz crystals charged by natural geomagnetic fields and rune-etched metallic conductors. The grid didn't produce plasma radiation or electromagnetic fields. It generated a barrier of raw energy, the analog field, by stabilizing the physical and spatiotemporal oscillation around it. Temporal entities thrive by bending reality. They need time's flexibility to exist, Thorne explained. This grid is a physical time stabilizer. It forces reality back into equilibrium. Digital tries to fight an illusion with another illusion. Analog fights an illusion with undeniable reality. In the short, brutal hours of training, Thorne did more than drill combat without computer assistance. He instilled philosophy. Digital is information, analog is matter. Information is easily stolen, bent, or destroyed. Matter, stone, metal, bone, is undeniable. You must become analog. You must be unbending reality. Thorne and Jet, now both clad in dark, heavy analog protective gear and laden with heavy physical instruments, entered the abandoned factory complex. Immediately, they felt the distortion. Time seemed to accelerate, then slow. The smell of rust and ozone mixed with a sickening sense of spatiotemporal misalignment. Code Cinders, Jet. No rush. Every step must be deliberate, Thorne cautioned, his thickly gloved hands clutching a box of heavy crystals. Thorne meticulously set up the analog resonance grid. He placed each treated quartz crystal and connected them with rune-etched copper wire, forming a protective perimeter. As the final crystal was connected, a silent, almost invisible wave of static energy spread out. There was no bright flash, only the strange, sudden feeling of the air becoming unnaturally normal. This was raw time stability, a physical jammer against the chronoleech. The entity disliked it. Its familiars, the temporal gnats, small, distorted materializations of the main entity, began to flicker into existence, darting rapidly, trying to tear their skin. This was Jet's first true test. He drew the sonic blade. There was no target lock, no power armor acceleration. He relied on raw personal reflex and the forced focus Thorne had demanded. Jet married his innate combat expertise with the new analog principle, absolute physical accuracy. He didn't slash, he created sonic interference. The blade sang a high, piercing note, not metal striking metal, but molecules being ripped apart. The temporal gnats, beings that relied on instability, were annihilated when their basic oscillation was shattered by the pure frequency. Well done, Jet. You are fighting with matter, Thorne encouraged, simultaneously pulling weak children to safety. They succeeded in ushering the children into the secure zone inside the resonance grid, their very presence stabilized by the analog field. At this point, the main chronoleech materialized. It was a swirling mass of gray and violet temporal energy, emitting a shriek like tearing fabric. The entity recognized that the analog grid was not a wall of energy to be breached, but a physical reflection of core reality. The chronoleech tried to bend time within the grid, but the quartz crystals and etched runes generated a powerful counterforce, pushing the temporal energy back. Like trying to bend a solid bar of titanium with thought alone, the entity was repelled by the unmanipulable analog energy imbalance. With a timeless roar, the chronoleech realized this enemy was immune to its tricks and was forced to retreat into its spatiotemporal rift. The faint light of Sector 7 filtered through the broken windows of crude memory. Jet Veridian, back in basic fatigues and streaked with dust, was carefully cleaning the sonic blade. Gone was the arrogance of the digital Aegis agent. In its place was the quiet focus of an apprentice. "Thank you, Thorne," Jet said, his voice softer and more genuine than ever before. He wasn't talking about weaponry or tactics. He was talking about truth. The power armor allowed me to deflect and absorb. Code Cinders forced me to confront. I realized that digital reliance was just glittery armor covering a core weakness. We never understood the enemy. We just threw power at it until it collapsed. But against the chrono leech, that was meaningless. Jet laid the sonic blade down reverently. The analog preparation, the resonance grid, saved those children. That is the real foundation of survival, not algorithms. Thorne nodded, his wrinkled face showing a rare satisfaction. Digital is always the easy solution. It requires no sacrifice, no physical comprehension. It just needs batteries and a password. Code Cinders requires you to be the reality you are defending. Jet stood straighter, now speaking with the authority of the Aegis command structure, yet with the humility of a student. The Commandant knows what happened, and I impressed the truth. We failed, and Analog won. Aegis needs you, Thorne, not as a temporary advisor, but as the architect of our revised hunting methodology. Jet extended the official offer. Kaelen Thorne, Aegis offers you the position of Chief Analog Archivist and Custodian of Code Cinders. Your purpose will not be direct combat, but to instill the philosophy of balance and the art of physics-based hunting in the new generation of hunters. We need you to ensure we do not blindly follow the digital path to self-destruction again. Thorne looked around his worn shop. For 30 years, he had lived in Sector 7, protecting ancient physical secrets. He had despised Aegis, viewing them as the pinnacle of digital arrogance. But now, Aegis was begging for that knowledge. If he refused, the analog philosophy would die with him, and the digital hunters would continue to fail miserably against cosmic threats. I will accept, Thorne said, his voice firm. But you and the others must understand. I am not a technical consultant. I am the guardian of the philosophy. I will teach you how to strip the armor and how to listen to the metal speak. I will teach you the weight of a silver bullet and the interference of a quartz crystal. In the following days, the change began. Thorne officially closed crude memory, giving the keys to Varys and Ina, asking them to preserve the mechanical legacy of Analog in Sector 7. He took only the essentials, his aged leather notebooks, the etched runes, and a box containing the core components of the resonance grid. As Thorne stepped into the gleaming Aegis digital headquarters complex, the contrast was jarring. The quantum light sensors and automated doors almost stuttered at the presence of the 62-year-old man, still carrying the dust and raw metal of his trade. Thorne began his work. His designated area was a lab with no network connection, shielded by classical signal-jamming materials. Jet Veridian was his first pupil, no longer wearing shimmering armor, but painstakingly learning the art of balancing momentum and manually sharpening the sonic blade. In his first lecture, Thorne stood before a hall of young Aegis operatives, all wondering if this aged man was the Commandant's joke. Code Cinders is not a strategy, Thorne declared, placing a rough quartz crystal on the table. It is an oath that you will never rely entirely on that which can be switched off, hacked, or inverted by your enemy. The digital age gave you speed. The analog age gives you foundation. When the two combine in balance, you become true hunters. Thorne looked directly at Jet. Jet nodded, understanding that while Neo-Veridia may have been built on quantum light, its survival now depended on the unbending principles of analog physics. The legacy of Wrench Thorne was no longer buried in Sector 7. Code Cinders had become the newest and most necessary weapon of the digital Aegis force.